Okie dokie. Welcome to Flux Dev Meeting Thursday edition. I do not believe we have a couple of talks on the agenda to give shout outs for. Is there any other stuff that people want to put on the agenda before we get started?
It looks like there's action items from last meeting.
Oh, there are action items. I'm so used to there not being action items. Good, cool. Where do the action items get? Do I need to? Oh, I need to go looking for things labeled action. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm pasting some in. Here's a few.
Nice one, thank you.
What is the context of this?
Was that? I think that was the Flagger website.
Oh, this is Flagger move. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Let me have a look for anything else. That's that. There was. Oh, okay. There was an action to review the blog post, but that blog post has been published. So that's good. And there is an action to help complete the due diligence doc. Daniel's not here, and neither is Scott, so we may not get a report on how that's going. So what I'll do is I'll just paste that in so that we're reminded. And okay. Okay. And I'm also going to put on here in a second. Okay, reviewing action items from last meeting. The big one was about, or a couple of action items were to do with moving Flagger into the Flux org. The actions were figuring out a URL scheme, I guess. That is specifically a URL scheme for putting the Flagger bits of website and docs under fluxcd.io. And the CNCF will also want to have the domain transferred to them at some point. Have either of those things made any progress? I don't think either of them are super, super urgent.
No progress.
No progress. Okay, fine.
One thing to talk about is closing up the WeWork Slack for Flagger and creating a Flagger Slack channel in CNCF, because I don't think we want to mix everything inside Flux channel. Or maybe we do.
Yep. No, that does. I mean, it's quite busy there anyway, and it would be at least double as busy.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, so we have to create, I don't know who can create channels in CNCF Slack. Anyone?
We could probably just request one. I don't think any of us can do it. But...
Someday.
Sorry, Lee, can you say that again?
I was just trying to think of who the right person to request.
Probably Ihor.
Ihor?
Yeah, or one of our liaisons anyway. We can just put in a service desk thing. Stefan, you've got access to the service desk, haven't you?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Do you mind doing that?
Yeah,
I think it's a good idea to have a separate channel.
We'd probably have some migration period where we could auto respond in the existing Flagger Slack to point people over there.
Yep.
For like, I don't know, like a month.
We can do that. WeWork Slack is the free Slack edition. We just have to pin a message like we did with Flux on the Flux channel, give people.
I just created the Flagger channel on CNCF Slack.
Oh, nice. What a boss.
It's a magical power.
I like how Hida just sits there like, quietly and just solves the problem. And then it's like, okay, it's solved.
He's always doing that.
Yeah, we're always like, but who has permission? Do we really have, you know, do we have the right to do this? You know.
All right, well,
I've done it. I've done it. All right, fantastic. So we should put like an autorespond or a pinned message or something in the existing Flagger Slack. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Well, I'm going to put action. Any more on that topic? Any more on Flagger migration in general?
Yeah, we have to change the logo.
Oh, yes. Should we set aside a bit more time today to talk about the logo? So we talked about it last week at the EU version of this meeting. And Bianca has since come up with a few versions, few varieties. Do you mind finding the link to that and putting it in the chat? Just to, yeah, brilliant. In fact, it's probably just below here in the. Tell you what, I'll put that on the agenda.
Oh, I didn't see this. This is cool.
I have to drop in 17 minutes, so I'd prefer
let's do that now then.
do it first. Oh, that would be good.
Yeah. Let's do it now. All right, cool.
I can share my screen if people just want to look at the discussion.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And then we can just talk about our feelings
Sure.
with respect to the logo. That sounds
Let's
good.
do that. Sorry, let me load it up. One moment. Okay.
I really like the ones where the arrows are going left to right.
Yeah. We also, so does everyone see the discussion?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, okay. With the ones going left to right, the question kind of comes up, like I'm making these drawings all on a white background, but like, how does transparency work with that? So Hida brought up that the screen that I chose is a bit strange with the Flux blue, which is also Kubernetes blue. So then I ended up superimposing these onto other blues, but that brought up the question like, well, this arrow is white on a white background, it's just transparent. Does that mean it's white on a darker background, or does that mean that the whole thing is transparent? So maybe that's my next step of a thing that I'm going to draw and post in this discussion. For both, I guess, just for the side arrow variations. Does everyone like the side arrow variations? Sorry, the left to right variations better? Or do people also like this, which looks kind of like a Flux Plus, unfortunately?
I like the left to right arrows. I was wondering, could there be an element of them being sort of at an angle? So either the arrows the way I kind of drew that to start off with, there was a stalk off which those were forking,
Mm-hmm.
the two
Yeah.
different things. And
I just couldn't really fit that into a square. Go on.
Okay, yeah. And the reason for that was that there was sort of a sort of sense of progress, something linking those three arrows. It's like dunka dunka dunk.
Just have them
So I wonder
cascade
if,
down diagonally a little.
yeah, maybe, or even be rotated like the lozenges, the rhomboids. If they were rotated.
If you put them on the edge of the square instead of it's now in the corner, right?
Yeah, that's what I was
You make
thinking.
them move upwards, like 45 degrees.
Well, 30 degrees, like the edge of the square. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to draw here, but it's not really looking. I mean, I think you understand, maybe. How do I see myself? Like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, a bit more like that. Yeah. But,
I think that also makes it look like it's moving instead of the current version is like shifting inwards instead of giving you the idea that it's moving forward.
Yeah, so they're all moving into that slightly to the right forward direction.
It's got less going
like
on
to perspective.
The example that you drew. I like that it was just the two rhomboids with the two arrows.
This one. Wait.
The one that you just drew on your phone, just as a quick sketch.
Oh yeah.
So it may be the one that you were just looking at, right? It's only just two of them. And
good call.
It makes it a little simpler to parse visually.
I think so too. Great. And I really like the screen that Hida shows in the background while he's solving problems while we're just
about that. I didn't use that color.
You didn't use this color?
No. I had to change it because when I was working on squares being blue and green, the color saturation, I think, didn't really match. So it just went with the green that was already present in the theme. You can see it on the website, fluxcd.io. But we can always change the colors again. I mean, it's just a variable in the CSS.
Yeah, we typically use a white logo. If it's like you wouldn't use the blue logo on a saturated blue background, so not sure if the original concern is necessarily but the white, like if the logo looks different enough, I mean, we could just have a white version as well.
Like as a designer, you always have to be prepared for dark mode. So whether it's a blue background or a black background, like I just need to make this logo in a way that it works transparent and it works not. And I think that having like the way that I've rendered it here with the white is a bit strange. But I'll work on it with this new with our new thoughts about this. That'll also bring thoughts about transparency, and it will be resolved, I think.
Thank you for working on this. It's so cool.
It is my job, unlike some people who just hang out because I thank you to all the more open sources, non-Weave workers. But yes, it's a pleasure.
I like the Flagger logo for a while.
The one that's at the top of the screen now. I like I think it's just because it's transparent on white, but it starts to kind of make use, because some of the edges are lined up. It starts to make use of kind of negative space. I quite like that. How that middle arrow especially could almost be a cutout, right? Because it's on a white background. It might be tricky to make that work when you rotate things, because the edges won't line up anymore. But
if there are only two rhomboids, that also makes it more strange.
Maybe, yeah.
But cool. Okay, I have plenty of stuff to try. Do people have more feedback, or should we move on to something more?
We can do. Should we do another round, and then another round of logo illustration, and then next week or whenever we can have another discussion.
Right. Yeah.
Or indeed in the discussion.
The only other feedback I have is just a little bit more radical input, which is that when I think of a Flagger logo, I usually think of like a pun on like a flag. So, so that could be also a thing. It might not be hard
but
to
I don't know. I think that's great feedback. Like the rhomboids could be a flag somehow.
Yeah, or you could just put a flag in the rhomboids as well instead of an arrow. Like the Flux logo has an arrow. Yeah, there might be a couple of options there to just play with flags.
That's interesting.
I always thought of like, I like the traffic logo where like the little gophers like doing the glow sticks, but then I was kind of picturing it with like flags instead. Anyway,
yeah. That might be too complex, but
or like a boat with flags. Yeah, it's like
with gophers on it holding glow sticks.
Yeah, no, I like that you went with kind of transforming the existing visual theme of the Flux project. I think it makes sense to do that.
Yeah, so. I just don't want to create too many logos that people find hard to recognize. I try to make it a family.
Yeah, I think one of the advantages of maybe using a flag instead of an arrow might be that visual differentiation. Like it's just a completely different idea rather than like, oh, the arrow is pointing in this direction. It's like actually a different concept. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, but you could maintain everything else the same, right? Like you could still keep the top opaque rhomboid and then the bottom.
Yeah, it would almost be the exact same format of the logo.
Except
swap
the
out
flag.
the arrow. Yeah.
It's probably not going to work, but I'm going to do it anyways so that we know what it looks like.
I usually think of the angled flags, like the triangle ones, like kind of like what you'd see on a golf course or whatever.
Yeah. Golf flag.
I like the idea of a family of. This is Chris Sanders at Microsoft. I like the idea. Bianca says of a family of. I just joined, so I missed the first part of this conversation. A family of logos in the Flux family, where. One, when a customer sees it, they'll know that it is part of the Flux family. But in general, when I see logos, I don't look at it as a logo to immediately understand what this thing is about. Basically, to me, logos are something that you learn they're associated with a certain capability. And then ever after, then you see that logo and you know what it means.
Right.
So,
like now, whenever I see a whale, even not in clip art, even in real life, I just think dolphin.
Exactly.
That's a terrible affliction.
Yep, that's a good example.
Cool. Yeah, that's all very good feedback. I will produce work from it and post it in the discussion. And if you're very, very keen, then we can talk about it in the discussion. And if not, we'll talk about it in the meeting next week.
Excellent.
Cool. Thank you.
Awesome.
All right. So let's, actually, I'm going to leave space for a link there, and let's go on to Lee, just to kind of get these because they were there first. Do you want to talk a bit about the GitOps and Flux v2 talks that you're planning?
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah, on the 25th, spread the word to anyone that you are sharing Flux with or folks who are trying to get started. We're going to be doing a more introductory, more beginner-friendly user group meetup. So we've been doing these webinars frequently. If you haven't checked in, there's links to the actual meetup pages inside of the agenda. And we're going to be talking about the core concepts. Samtochi just pushed some work up into the docs recently that starts to introduce what are the basic ideas that you need to know. We're going to go through those so that folks can become familiar with Flux, either if they're very beginner user, or if you are, say, somebody from the platform team, somebody who's very familiar with the Flux, you could get some tips on how to teach these things and see the format of how to introduce these ideas to your team members. So that'll be the 25th of January. And then on February 8th, also super excited. I think Michael's kind of given a little bit of an okay to go over a public walkthrough of the image automation guide that we have in alpha currently. So we'll be doing a little community talk with the demo there to discuss or demonstrate how that works. Hopefully we'll get some users of the image automation features and a little bit of feedback out of that in the coming month or so. So that's the 2 talks that are on the way.
Cool, thank you. So I think like that series of talks is quite good for just getting people up and running, isn't it? As in, if people have colleagues that aren't quite so familiar with Flux v2 as we all are, I'm very happy to see the image automation featuring.
Yeah, we typically try to alternate between beginner content and then very kind of edgy, intermediate alpha content. Because we definitely get a mixture of folks joining. Some people are, really trying to learn even just what is GitOps, and then other folks are there because they are excited members of our community. They're advocates. They're answering questions, and so we try to serve those folks exciting cluster API demos and weird experimental usage of stuff. So,
yeah. Hopefully the image automation won't be too weird and experimental for long.
Yeah. I think that there's a potential there, though, to do some creative things that are beyond what we have in the guide, like potentially using it to template into configs that are not necessarily for Kubernetes, like configurations for your template expansions.
Interesting. Yeah. There's a very gnarly issue that was filed in the last few days about someone sort of having multiple layers of template expansion and wanting the image automation to work with that.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a workable solution there, and I don't actually think anything needs to change with the current design. So
okay.
I heard about that.
Okay. Cool. All right. Thanks, Lee. So what's just scrolling back up to the agenda. Okay, so another item is multi-tenancy way forward. So there's a fairly long discussion with input from lots of people that are here right now about multi-tenancy. And Lee has also written a document. What? It's in the form of a PR, right? Like
it's a proposal. We have a proposals directory. It's what we did with the Git providers thing. So I imagine that this will, become kind of necessary for anything that's super complex like this.
I put this on here because I think we should try and figure out the process of incorporating, like how to get the proposal into the right shape, because I agree, I think it's worth having a design actually all laid out, and sort of what the process is in general for how to tackle multi-tenancy. So Lee, sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to say something.
No, yeah, I was trying to give you space to finish your thoughts. Yeah, definitely this was kind of Cap inspired. So just what we do in other communities like Kubernetes. And the proposal is definitely in a good first draft format. If you haven't been able to give it a read, I'm definitely going to be sharing this with other security folks in the cloud native community to get some feedback. I'd like to see some comments from really criticizing the mechanisms from people who are not even outside of the Flux community. A lot of these patterns are very generic, but they're very new. There's definitely not a lot of any of these mechanisms really being used in the proper way in other projects. So what's here is novel, which means it needs to be scrutinized pretty closely. I've tried to document quite a few edge cases and the proper way to deal with them. And thanks to everyone. I know Jonathan Innes from Microsoft provided some valuable feedback in an area that we hadn't considered, and we were able to amend the document with regard to notifications from sources as well. So that required an additional proposed modification to a source controller. And then, yeah, as far as moving forward on this, it's very implementable. There are a couple of like really minor decisions that need to just have a little bit of consensus. So when you review the doc, if you would kind of just say what you think should be done, there's an action or a section of decision making that needs to occur. And then I need to add some notes to this to just kind of line out some of the limitations regarding integrating with external authentication systems, like for cloud identities, things like that. And where does the scope stop? And yeah, why is the current state of cloud identity and Kubernetes sort of non-uniform? And what can we do about it? So, super excited about this actually. Just, like quite proud of what we already have here. It's definitely not just the product of individual work. So many folks have contributed to making this happen. So go take a look and share it with folks, especially security-minded folks. And yeah, I definitely would like to get some more comments on this before we start actually merging and implementing things. So.
Yeah, my suggestion would be to improve the webhook implementation we have in the multi-tenancy example right now and get that in line with your proposal. For example, so in the current multi-tenancy for Flux 2, we prohibit tenants from accessing sources from other tenants, but we should expand that to the notification controller APIs, to, I don't know, image repository, everything else we have, because that's proof that all the things that we have in a proposal can work without modifying Flux at all. And it could be, people should have a choice. I'm pretty happy with the idea that using a webhook, you can do stuff like, hey, I have this dedicated namespace where I do want people to share the sources. And a good example is, let's say, Bitnami Helm repository, the public Helm repositories like Bitnami, like there are so many of those. If you are going to download all these charts, all these indexes in each namespace, you could get up to gigabytes of data for nothing. So it makes sense under some circumstances to allow sharing of some resources. And webhooks allows you to do that. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree that there's value in the existing Kubernetes policy controller based implementations. I think it even beyond like making it work with Flux, that multi-tenant repo that kind of demonstrates things can serve as an example to other folks about how to constrain the usage of other insecure APIs I certainly see there is a large difference between like taking something that isn't inherently multi-tenant and trying to constrain it at runtime with additional infrastructure versus building something that is inherently structured properly. And the Kubernetes core APIs are a good example of following those principles properly. And it's because those APIs have been just developed, I think, with a lot more thought than most of the community components that we see. So, but yeah, I think that's a good move. We should port some of the things that are inside of the proposal, the additional areas of concern, and see what's possible in the multi-tenancy repo.
But one thing I liked about the your RFC, Lee, as I understood it anyway, and it's very firmly established that I don't understand RBAC, but as I understood what you've written, it sidestepped the question of that was in the discussion of whether to have a kind of switch that goes between being secure and not secure by impersonating a group. And so you can just put that into the group and say, if you want people to have very broad permissions, just give them to the group, and you only have to do that once, and you can take them away again. So I really liked that. I think that's a really elegant solution to something that would kind of run up against that didn't really work for anyone. And it means that we can
RBAC mechanisms are very flexible.
Right. We can sort of all get what we want out of it that way, I think.
Yeah, I think just the main hat trick is like, how do you make a active reconciler have its own identity? And if you can do that in an RBAC native way, then you get the full richness of RBAC, which is something that anybody running Kubernetes at scale will have to accept and understand, and so you get the buy-in by like having a small impersonation mechanism. You can have an existing security team say, hey, that looks good to me, and then get the level of precision that you're looking for your team, your platform. You're not tied into like only use this namespace. You're not tied into only one level of hierarchy, which some of the suggestions were to like use a cluster source or like a cluster reconciler or cluster customization to kind of separate things that are shared across multiple namespaces versus a single namespace. The problem with that approach is that you prevent yourself from having like two disparate teams like managing the same cluster sources and not stepping on each other. Whereas if things are constrained within namespaces and then you're able to grant access to other namespaces and groups of folks based off of RBAC, then you can get that arbitrary level of hierarchy. If you need to represent your entire org structure inside of a bunch of repo syncs, then you're able to do that with the way that the proposal is laid out. Like keeping in mind, the very enterprise environments that Kubernetes is being adopted in. So certainly valuable.
Yep, and tooling that builds on it can also, take an opinion and do stuff with hierarchies, teams, and what have you. Remind me, is there a section that enumerates breaking changes or possible breaking changes? I think, to sort of adopt it, we would need to negotiate.
Yeah, melded into the decisions section. Yeah, I note when something would probably be a breaking change, or if there was a workaround, but it would really be better to have a breaking change inside of the document. Try not to be too opinionated on those decisions since they're kind of more controversial. And like, hey, here's what we could do, or we could do this or this. Let's decide. And then it's noted in the decision section. The primary one for that was just how do you actually represent the identity that's being selected inside of the specs of the API objects. Because currently we have a service account field, and you could just bolt on more fields right next to it, but then you have the issue of it being ambiguous, you know, if multiple fields are passed and that kind of thing.
Yeah, although lots of API objects have alternate fields that require one alternate, one of several alternatives.
Yeah, it's just validation with the CRDs can get a little tricky with that sometimes. We could totally do it though. It's just every controller would need to use some of like the same validation library. Yeah. Excellent. Well, yeah, I mean, that pretty much covers that. I'm eager to make progress on this. And that's, I think, a pretty fair representation of the things that are still not inside the proposal, like the external auth stuff for like communicating with buckets and registries. And yeah, the decisions that need to be made. Cool.
Should we kind of set ourselves a deadline for reviewing and, you know, commenting, and then, well, I'm kind of wary of setting deadlines because there's no particular consequence to missing it. So why create one?
Yeah.
But
we could have like, yeah, the proposed timeline. Are there steps that we can take to communicate this to stakeholders? I know that Microsoft was particularly interested in making sure that this feature set works. Jonathan has read the proposal, so that's good, but no comments. Should we ask for some comments from the Azure folks? Or Chris, if you're still around, if you have an opinion.
I mean, absolutely. I see Jonathan on here. I haven't talked to Jonathan lately about this, but this is
oh, Jonathan is on here. Yeah.
Anyway, I see him on there,
sorry.
but this is a very important area for us, and we realize that it's just in planning right now. I think that our trouble on our side is we're just absolutely swamped trying to get some other things done. Jonathan, is there time that you can take a more deeper look at the proposal? And
yeah, I think I need to. It's been a minute since I looked at it, so I think I need to reread over it again. But yeah, I can take a look at it. I know I sent a message out to other folks, but I can reping on that so other people can look at it as well. So we need more feedback. Yeah,
I think Lay, that we realize this is a critical thing, and so I think what I'll do is I'll talk with also the lead on our team that we need to jump in, spend some time to look at this and give some comments to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Because
I have a suggestion about this. Reading a doc doesn't mean you get the feeling of how this actually works.
Yep.
So implementing the restriction in the doc in the webhook and telling people, hey, try this out today as it is, see if it works for you, and the whole idea of how you add the tenant that has a private Git repo. It implies lots of stuff that's not in the proposal, but it's, you know, a side effect of having this kind of restriction. Unless you have a feeling about that and you actually try it, I don't think you can just say by reading the doc, hey, this is great, it will work for me. And afterwards, when you actually try it out, you see like, oh, this is too complex, I cannot do that. So I think first step, what we could do is set up a deadline when are we going to implement all these restrictions in the webhook, then tell people on that issue, hey, please try out the repo, see how the experience is, because from all the people that have tried it out, most of them said, yeah, it's great, but it's so complex, right? It's hard for me to add a tenant. Why are all these steps required? Can we make it better through something in the CLI? Can we make it better and change the whole proposal because maybe it's way too complex and no one will be able to figure it out? So
how prototypable is it, do you think, Leo?
I could certainly. Oh, you mean, Michael, by what mechanism?
So I think what Stefan's suggesting is that we could write some sort of throwaway webhook, admission webhooks, would they be, that just kind of tweak stuff so that it behaves as though the RFC is in force. Is that what you're suggesting, Stefan?
Yeah, so Kyverno has a feature where, and I've talked to their team and I actually tried out and it works. For example, when you create a namespace, Kyverno can create for you users inside that namespace, service accounts, role bindings, cluster role bindings, everything, because it's a customized patch. You can write it there and it applies it for you. So you can, by just writing some YAMLs for Kyverno, you can actually build everything that we are proposing to be built into Flux and the Flux CLI. So we can implement 99% of what is in that proposal using an external tool, a webhook. Okay, you don't have all those stuff in Git. In Git, you just say, hey, when a tenant namespace is created, please create all these things for me. For example, the user that we mentioned there, the role binding and everything else. So my proposal is use the Flux to multi-tenancy repo, implement in Kyverno all these things like we would do from code, and ask people to try it out. That's what I'm proposing.
Yeah, if that sounds plausible, Lee, I think that might be a good companion to the RFC, right? Is being able to point at something, do the slightly awkward setup in a throwaway environment, and then go through the multi-tenancy walkthrough or something like that. And then that will certainly give people a very good idea of what the trade-offs are. Does it sound plausible, tractable?
It's really a different level of abstraction. There are some things that you can accomplish that are similar, like referencing things from other namespaces. But it's just kind of hard to imagine how to prevent somebody from. I suppose you could write a policy check that prevents somebody from using a config map from the wrong namespace inside of a Helm value. It's just that kind of thing becomes inherent, when the client just has no access. But you would have to write a specific structural policy for every API addition that references or creates some kind of object relationship in order to implement tenancy in this way.
Right, but it wouldn't have to be completely generic. It would just, you could restrict it to.
You could show that the mechanism
kinds of object
works.
That appear. And, yeah.
This kind of thing would require constant maintenance as we continue to iterate on Flux APIs. To ensure that I can only imagine the test suite would also be very comprehensive. And it sounds tricky.
Well, I mean, if you do a prototype,
to prototype it, yeah,
then it can be smoke and mirrors.
We could help people understand, kind of how it works.
Yeah, I think that's the suggestion is.
Yeah,
just
it
get
sounds like
to a point, even if there's
work.
lots of.
Yeah, yeah.
Or even a partial implementation, right? So
Stefan has an existing partial implementation. Yeah, that like the repo that he's referring to already exists, and it does work and do multi-tenancy stuff.
Does it do the impersonation in the way you suggest it? Or?
It is able to, it uses the existing service account impersonation stuff. And then for things where the current Flux implementation is lacking, like preventing, what was it? It's cross namespace sources, or is it? Oh no, cross namespace sources referenced from customizations, right, Stefan?
So we have in our APIs, we have a type cross namespace reference, and that's blocked by Kyverno.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is running under a service account. So there is no cross reference for config maps or secrets or anything like that. I don't know what you are talking about. There is no such thing. You cannot tell Helm operator, Helm controller, hey, use the config map from another place to place that, because it will not be able to get it because it runs under a service account. And that service account is logged down to the tenant. So we don't have any of these issues. The only issue that we have is sharing sources for Helm releases and customization, and that's been disabled by Kyverno. What we need to add to that is, hey, me as a tenant, I cannot create an alert that selects something outside my namespaces. That's just another YAML for or another Kyverno policy. I mean, we don't have, our API has only a couple of places where we use cross namespace references, and that can be very easily blocked by a webhook. And it's not only about Kyverno here. We also have OPA gatekeeper rules that Philip wrote.
Yeah, so I've actually implemented this whole multi-tenancy thing, but it kind of works for me because I'm using Terraform, so I can like automatically generate these things and just define like tenants as namespaces. And then it's just easy to just have a list of tenants, and then Terraform does all that for you. So it's like, I understand where everyone else who's not able to do that comes from and says, oh, this is too difficult. And then I'm just running Gatekeeper, and I'm deploying Gatekeeper rules to do exactly what Stefan did with Kyverno. So technically it works. It's just, it's hard to explain to others to just go, oh, look at this Terraform module I wrote, good luck. It's a bit too complex to do that.
Right. But I mean, this is one of the things that the RFC addresses, and
yeah.
It makes much simpler, right? So a prototype that did not include that simplification would not really give you an accurate view of,
in
of
terms of
what's being
complexity.
suggested.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I guess it's unfair for like to use me as some sort of litmus test just to see how easy it is as I'm kind of deep into the whole thing, where it's like I can look at Stefan's example of a multi-tenancy repo and then just go, okay, I understand this. It's like I'm just thinking about the new user or like the newish enterprise who goes, oh God, we have to do all these steps. So I'm very positive to having a similar solution that's simpler to get wrong, if you want to call it that.
How about this? Could we write a walkthrough that assumes the implementation it won't be quite as good perhaps as having an actual working thing, but if you think through, instead of having to do all this stuff and perhaps needing Terraform to manage the complexity, then you only need to do these things. If you want to have a essentially single tenant cluster, you can set it up this way. If you want to have a multi-tenant cluster, here is how that looks. And even if it's not exactly 100% faithful to the suggested implementation, then at least it will give kind of an idea of what's possible. Does that sound viable, Lee, do you think?
That does sound viable. I think that's like basically just 2 steps beyond the examples section inside the proposal. Definitely was kind of the purpose of the examples, is to try and help make this like feel more tangible. Yeah. So we could totally try to write a guide. It says like, hey, you're looking to to accomplish this? You know, like how can you open up the permissions using, assuming that this was implemented? Yeah.
Right. Because my idea of it is that it is, if you just leave it, then it is secure, but it's also very easy to make it a very
open up.
To open it up, and so it kind of gets past a few of the things that we got stuck on in the discussion.
This is normally something, and ideally you could use the same mechanisms you're already familiar with. You know, I feel like it would be ideal to have a system that doesn't require bolt-ons to make it secure. So I certainly have been in an environment where the performance of the API server was a key metric of the system functioning at all in a batch processing workload. And injecting a webhook into the API server round trip on even a restricted number of kinds could be concerning. Yeah, it might make it difficult to implement something on Kubernetes in a large cluster. Philip, thanks for speaking up and talking about your Terraform and OPA implementation. That's actually super helpful to know that somebody is able to use this thing in real life and like make it work.
Good benchmark.
How many tenants are we talking, if you're able to say?
So right now it's in a development phase. So it's like, I'd say 3 tenants, but it's nothing I've pushed out to production yet. It's just, I'm trying.
And you have like one order of hierarchy there, basically.
Yeah. So it's
just 3 tenants under one management, which is you. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then basically it's kind of different, and I know with the whole using Terraform to manage Git, which is kind of interesting. So it's but basically what I'm doing is I'm using Azure DevOps Provider to commit files to a repo, and then pointing it to another repo, and then basically within their project in the same org, they have their access. So it's
I also helped a couple of users migrating from Flux 1 multi-tenancy to Flux 2 multi-tenancy. And someone was deploying 200 apps through 200 customizations and 5 or 6 tenants using Kyverno and everything that's in there.
Very nice. So, super high value. Cool.
Okay, well, that seems like a reasonable way forward then. Maybe if we can either have a sort of prototype or a sort of a walkthrough that assumes the RFC implementation, just to illustrate what it feels like, what it would feel like.
Yeah, so I don't think, so if we take the implementation as proposed and compare it to the webhook stuff, from this guide here that I wrote, you'll probably change 1% of the guide where we talk about service accounts, because the current Flux create tenant command, it creates a service account and also users, like in the proposal. So you'll just, ignore the service account and that's it. But the actual pain is onboarding tenants. That has nothing to do if it's a service account or a user. Who cares about that? That's the real pain, because you have to do a bunch of stuff. You have to encrypt before you can add the Git repository. You have to encrypt the secret. You have to set all these things in the tenant namespace. The tenant namespace has to exist before that. You have to use dependencies between cluster-wide things and the tenants things and so on. That's where the pain is not about, okay, we are going to drop the service account and use a Kubernetes user because, well, of course, a pod cannot run under it and so on, all these nice features of using users. But from a user perspective and end user perspective, that has no value. In a way, not value, has no impact on what it needs to do to onboard the tenant and what the tenant can do afterwards with everything that's being set up.
Yeah, we could expand on the existing proposal and talk about tenant creation UX. I think part of the missing recipe here is like that we don't have, for instance, what Philip is using the Azure DevOps Terraform provider for. There's no repo creation flow inside of the Flux APIs. We have the Bootstrap flow inside of the CLI. So we could potentially extend on that to generate PKI and create repositories that then have matching objects that are supposed to be committed to your main repository. But that's definitely like a huge challenge to be like, oh, it should work this way when we don't have any APIs that do that. And like, how do we constrain the UX to be something that feels nice when there's no way to create a GitHub repository? It's definitely tough.
Even if you can create it, you still have to encrypt those things. You still have to manage PGP keys, KMS keys. We have no way of doing
the list of options would be massive. This is really good that you're bringing this up because it is definitely a huge part of the design issue is the stuff that Flux doesn't own currently that people would need to do in order to actually use these mechanisms in a more tenant-friendly way. One potential escape hatch for like a little bit of an easier implementation is like folks using GitLab can use ACLs and tenancy within the same repository. And that simplifies the setup because you can just have a single repo and then use all of the multi-tenancy features inside of the proposal, but then with, folder restrictions. There's also potential to maybe use owner files inside of GitHub to achieve a single repo multi-tenant environment as well. As long as you don't care about tenants reading each other's configs, if it's just about write access, then something like that could be accomplished. But the logs, the Git log, you'd have to teach everybody how to read the log of a subtree. So it's
the commit status functionality would kind of not.
That would also get really leaky. Yeah, because then you would just have a bunch of commit status from like all of these different tenants, and then CI has to be folder sensitive, and that's definitely got its own limitations as well.
Yeah.
So.
Just because we've gone past the scheduled end of the meeting, I want to say thank you to everyone. We can stay here and talk for a bit if you wish to, but probably some people have got stuff to, other meetings to go to and other stuff to get on with. So thanks anyone that needs to drop off. And now you may continue.
I want to ask Chris a question.
Just want to say one more thing. We're going to, on the Microsoft side here, chatted with Jonathan. We're going to bring some people. We're going to deep dive on the proposal early next week and hopefully have some comments for you. That's Jonathan's already been looking at it, but we'll get some more eyes on it. So,
if you could also look through the guide that Stefan is mentioning with his multi-tenancy repo, I think that would be helpful context as well.
Okay, is that guide in the Flux 2 repo, or I haven't seen it yet? So
I pasted the link in chat.
Okay, cool.
It's Flux 2 multi-tenancy.
Got it.
And it's in fluxcd.org.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, cool. I want to give you some good news.
Yay!
So starting with, I don't know, December, Flux 2 works with Azure DevOps repos, thanks to Philip. And we can also write back commit statuses to Azure DevOps. I don't know, a health check fails, something fails, to write back to Git for that particular commit, what's happening. And we also have a way to bootstrap an Azure DevOps plus AKS cluster from Terraform. What we've been doing, we've been using the C bindings for libgit2. It's a lot of details. The issue is you cannot run this stuff on Windows. So we'll not have support for bootstrapping an Azure DevOps repository through the CLI. You'll have to use Terraform and Terraform with the Azure DevOps provider to do that. But we'll have the same experience, so to speak.